Bienvenue, French as an American. Welcome to the third annual Innovation Challenge, a Canadian virtual hospice initiative, and an original innovation from the Canadian Virtual Hospice Executive Director, Shelley Corey. With, yes, a little round of applause for Shelley Corey. Yes, good. However, with the excellent support of and coordination of Marissa David, who couldn't be with us today, and the excellent team at CVH. Another round of applause for the team. Yes. Je m'appelle Corey Ingram, and that's the last of my French you'll hear today. I'm your MC for this, and when I'm not in the spotlight here with you, I'm working shoulder to shoulder with interdisciplinary team members in hospice and palliative care, just like all of you. And there's nothing I would rather do than this work. And I'm reminded that perhaps one of the best innovations in our field was the creation of hospice and palliative care interdisciplinary teams and the model of caring that has very deep roots right here in Montreal. So thank you, all of you, for all you do. Thank you for your presence at this conference, and thank you for coming to learn about what our sixth finalists have to share with you and to find out who will become the 2024 International Innovator of the Year. Yes. But I want to introduce you to our judges. And we have three international judges. Holly Prince, PhD candidate and in educational studies, is the division lead for Indigenous Peoples Health and Aging Division at the Center for Education and Research on Aging and Health at the Lakehead University in Thunder Bay, Ontario. And important to note, Holly was the first winner of the Innovation Challenge on a project to create a workbook for Indigenous people to have a better understanding of palliative care. So thanks for being here. Next, we have Bridget Johnson, Clinical Professor of Nursing and Palliative Care and Director of Research at the School of Medicine, Dentistry and Nursing at the University of Glasgow in Scotland. Yes. And then my neighbor and good friend, Erica Srinivasan, who is Associate Professor of Psychology at the University of Wisconsin in La Crosse, Wisconsin, and is the lead instructor for the Grief Support Specialist Certificate Program in the Division of Continuing Studies at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. So we've got a great group of judges and a great group of panelists here. So in the next 78 minutes, I go to the podium for this. In the next 78 minutes, we are, number one, celebrating innovations in our field. And you should know that we received 57 submissions from 14 countries. So these submissions were reviewed by 7 peer reviewers that helped narrow this large submission down to 6 finalists. And the reviewers were Dr. Harvey Chochnov, Rory Farron, Mahoney Hines, Dr. Samantha Winemaker, Dr. Wendy Lichtenthal, Dr. Adam Rappaport, and myself. Each finalist will have 6 minutes to present their innovation. The finalists will be cued when they have 1 minute, 30 seconds, and 15 seconds remaining. And then following their presentation, the judges will provide commentary or questions or maybe a snarky remark, but we'll keep it nice, right? As I mentioned to the finalists yesterday, they are all winners by nature of being selected to be here today. Yes. The audience, you all, will be having the opportunity to vote for your favorite innovation. And that information will be presented to you at the time you need it. The voting will be open for 90 seconds, and you'll be able to vote for your favorite innovation that you're seeing today. And the winners will be determined by the judges with input from your online voting. Okay, so it's important that you vote. And it will be taken into consideration. The winner will be named the International Palliative Care Innovator of 2024 and receive a very generous $1,000 Canadian cash prize from the Canadian Virtual Hospice. And you want to stay to the end because the winners will be immediately announced following the judge's deliberation. And we will also have another drawing while the judges are deliberating and announce the winner of the Apple Watch from the Canadian Virtual Hospice draw. So that was a lot. Are we ready to get started? Yes. Very good. So it is my pleasure to welcome to the stage Dr. David Wu, who is a palliative care doc at Johns Hopkins Bayview, presenting sharing the impact of environmental care team on patient experience through film screening and education for healthcare staff through the research collaborative called PICAR at Johns Hopkins Bayview. Dr. Wu?
Is this live? Is this mic on? Okay, great. All right. So actually, I just stepped down from my position at Johns Hopkins 2 weeks ago. I'm not starting my new job at NIH for 2 days. So the best description for me is David Wu, unemployed.
Very good.
But in the meantime, it's my joy to be here to present on behalf of PICAR, which is a collaborative interprofessional that spans the Hopkins Schools of Nursing, Medicine, and Public Health, doing community co-design projects to address health disparities in palliative care. At the heart of the project I'm going to talk about is the big picture question. How do we form deep and trusting connections with the diverse patients and families we serve in our hospital? Is there a bigger picture question than that? I don't know. Our hospital, Johns Hopkins Bayview, is 450 beds. It's in Baltimore, Maryland in the US. We serve a diverse community that's largely under-resourced. Now let's zoom in to one hospital room where I'm sitting at bedside with Ms. X. She's a middle-aged woman with severe heart failure. She's been hospitalized for 2 months, and I've gotten to know her well over that time. And she's sharing with me her frustrations about the teams of doctors coming in and out, talking at her instead of with her. And as we're talking, we hear the rumble of carts outside. In walks Ms. Tasha from the environmental care team. As she is emptying the trash in the room, she and Ms. X are talking like neighbors, chatting over their fence. They're talking not just about the hospital, but about friends, neighbors, church, and life. And I was blown away. It was a light bulb moment. Here is a largely unseen and unrecognized staff member who has formed a deep and trusting connection with our patient. And in parallel through many of our community co-design projects, this theme kept popping up as we were talking to patients and families. This idea demanded a project of its own. And so we designed a project. My co-PI, Rebecca Wright, is an expert in experience-based co-design at the Hopkins School of Nursing. What we did was partner with environmental care team members, as well as patients and families, to understand their experiences and then co-design improvement priorities. This completely non-scientific graph summarizes our big picture finding. For patients in the hospital for a prolonged period of time, they identified growing positive, strong relationships with EVC staff that grew greater over time. Unfortunately, the opposite was true for nurses and doctors. What did they identify with EVC staff? Kind communication, hospitality, making that hospital room feel like a home, and ultimately treating the patient as a person. This is incredibly newsworthy. There's almost nothing about this in the literature. And so it's really key for us to disseminate it. And I'm going to talk to you about two key dissemination strategies we've been implementing in our medical center. One is a film screening. Here's a short clip to give you a sample.
The environmental staff were easier to actually have a conversation with than a nurse who was rushing around trying to get in and out of 4 or 5 rooms in a certain period of time. And they're willing, like that one gentleman was willing to joke around with me. And we had a blast. And it was maybe a 5-10 minute conversation, but it ended up making me feel like, wow, he cared. You know? And it helps me to get through to the next day. And a lot of it, I think, goes toward peace of mind, too.
What a profound impact, peace of mind. The second key strategy I'm going to talk to you about is education. What better way to provide education than to invite environmental care team members to teach us? Here's Esperanza Banks teaching a class at the Hopkins School of Nursing.
Hopefully the takeaway you get from this is like remembering that the EVC associate is a part of your team. You can rely on them. You know, there's nothing wrong with saying good morning. I teach my staff to speak good morning. Sometimes they feel like nurses may not speak back to them, look down on them.
Makes you wonder about the impact of hierarchies in the hospital, doesn't it? So we have disseminated this to a wide variety of audiences, nurses and doctors, trainees and leaders. And we've been told this is eye-opening and potentially paradigm shifting. And just to give you a couple sample quotes, the same way that nurses may feel like when a doctor comes in and interrupts what they're doing, EVC staff can feel that way when the nurses come in to give meds. I see the opportunity to involve EVC staff in meetings about improving patient experience. What we need now is action. Lost our music. What we need now is an action. Our next steps are integration and dissemination. And so, you know, this is all about making a culture change, empowering the voices of people who don't usually have a voice. It's a big idea. It goes against the grain. It goes against hierarchy. But this is a hugely important problem, and big ideas are needed. Thank you.
Well said, Dr. Wu. And I'm going to turn it over to Holly for a moment to ask questions here. We have a mic for Holly.
Hello. Hello. Good. Miigwech. Miigwech, Dr. Wu, and congratulations on your unemployment and probably the shortest vacation in the history of time.
Yeah.
So I want to know, how do you define innovation and why should people in this room vote for you?
Oh, great. That's a great question. So how do I define innovation? I think that I'm going to go back to the big picture question I asked in the beginning, right? How do we How do we form deep and trusting relationships with the diverse patients and families we serve? An innovation there might be, a real innovation there is not just in terms of process, but in terms of reimagining who we is. It's about thinking about things from a different angle and reimagining our team to be broader and more inclusive, to think about people who we don't normally think about, who are already doing incredibly impactful, meaningful work that is unrecognized. So that's an example of an innovation. It's coming at it from a different angle and wrapping our arms around it in a broader, more inclusive way.
Wow. Follow, Polly?
Good, thank you.
You just want a round of applause for Dr. Wu.
Yeah, that was amazing. Good job.
Wow. Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. Deep connections. Aren't you so glad you came to the Innovation Challenge? Yes. My goodness. Thank you, Dr. Wu. So our next presenter, and for those of you, in a moment, we will be having a French presentation as well. If you haven't downloaded the Zoom link and use it with earbuds, so you can certainly take an opportunity to do that before that comes along here after a bit. So our next presenter, Aaron Das on the Global Treehouse, from the Global Treehouse Foundation, presenting a customizable data tool co-designed with global children's palliative care providers to enhance understanding and improve services to those patients. And we want to do a very special thank you to Sharon Wall and Betsy Hutchinson for sponsoring travel for Aaron to come and be with all of you all the way from Kenya to present and be a part of this Innovation Challenge. Aaron, we're really glad you're here.
Okay, well, good afternoon. Habari ya jioni, maybe? Good evening is how we say in Kenya. I have something really important to talk to you today. Children with serious illness and their families deserve the best possible palliative care. I think you would all agree. In this room, I'm sure you would all agree. But how do we make sure this happens, not only here in Montreal, but also where I live in Nairobi, Kenya? My name is Erin Das, as you have heard, and I'm an advanced practice palliative care nurse at Global Treehouse Foundation. It's so nice to be with you, and I am really grateful that I was sponsored to join you today. I have a few questions that I'd like us to think about together. How do we track that the time a nurse spends with a girl or a child that is diagnosed with leukemia is guided by best practice? How do we ensure that I'm not sure where to turn this. Yes, here we go. How do we ensure that our playrooms and also our waiting rooms are focused on siblings and parents, especially on their days that are the longest? How do we track and even prevent stockouts of medications like opioids to ensure that there's uninterrupted care, even for a 12-year-old boy in severe pain? And how do we measure that holistic spiritual care is given to children that are sick, their families, and their relatives? Well, all around the world, understanding how holistic palliative care improves the lives of children and families is not impossible, but this is the challenge that we responded to at Global Treehouse. Children's palliative care teams around the world face increasing pressure to show the impact of their work. Whether it's analyzing the use of best practices for symptom management, recording patient and family-reported outcomes, capturing community needs assessments, or even tracking why do our missed visits occur in our clinics, we often find we don't have the tools we need to effectively track and analyze this data that we're already collecting. Providers are stretched thin, as most of you know, and without meaningful data, it becomes really difficult to continuously improve our care and demonstrate our services' value. With many of our colleagues worldwide facing similar issues, we saw a need for a community of individuals and organizations to come together and really encourage the usage of data in children's palliative care. And so the Magnify tool was born. We created it to address this exact challenge. The Magnify tool is a customizable data tool designed to help children's palliative care providers effectively explore, I think it's this way, just so you know. All right, to explore their data and their information. It was designed by users and for users. I'm so sorry. It was co-designed and co-created with over 60 contributors from more than 20 countries representing 6 continents, and we are so proud of this. This worldwide collaboration has allowed the tool to be relevant and useful across many different settings. It has 10 different focus areas of care, such as patient and family-reported outcomes, clinical outcomes, community awareness, education, research, and even staff well-being, just to name a few. Under the 10 focus areas are specific metrics that are tailored to children's palliative care teams. Metrics can be rated in terms of the current status the teams are doing. So if they're doing this well, they can choose that and then write a note. If they want to improve it, they can also choose that as well, not doing it or even their future priority, which really helps teams identify what's working well in their area and also what they want to improve in the future. What makes this tool unique is that it is designed by users and for users to help really improve children's palliative care. We are in the initial stages of dissemination. We're really excited. The tool was launched September 2024. And it is ready to be used. We are going to begin working with providers in Canada, the US, Brazil, the UK, Kenya, and South Africa and India. Today, as of today, we're at over 110 downloads, and it's really exciting. I'm so sorry. This is supposed to, yes. All right, it was designed specifically for providers like you, so you can take the next step in really improving your care. Sorry? The laptop. I'm so sorry. I should just leave it here. This is what you did, right, David? All right. Well, we know that in children's palliative care, the care that we provide is not easy. And even though years ago, an anecdotal story of taking care of a family who lost a child could be enough to get you data, funding even, to grow your program, it's not really the case anymore. This is a picture of my daughter. She was born at 23 weeks, and we named her Micah. I'm not exactly sure if the team would be able to track the type of care that we received, but I hope in the future, children's palliative care providers will be able to figure out how to prove that what they did for us and my family on that day was improving our care. The Magnify tool is transforming how children's palliative care providers think about their information and their data. And it starts today. So with your support through partnership, funding, or simply downloading this tool, you can join us. And we welcome you here to, oh, good, the last one worked. Okay, so you can get your phones out. You can take a screenshot. The Magnify tool is free. And we'd love for you to join us as we create lasting change for children's palliative care providers and their teams. Thank you so much.
Oh, stay right here. What a lovely innovation.
The clicker. Somebody innovate the clicker.
Yes, you did. She did great. She did great, even with the clicker troubles. So I believe that Bridget is going to ask you some hard questions.
Yeah.
Hello? Is that working? Can I have my mic working? Yeah, okay. So I'd like to ask you what you think is particularly special about your innovation.
Yeah, so we got a chance to work with many different teams over the last year. So I think it can be really difficult to talk about the fact that maybe your team is struggling improving your care. And I think a lot of the teams we engaged with as we designed the tool, it's been 15 iterations of the tool. I think that took a lot of humility of teams that were actually quite advanced in how they do palliative care. And people are actually quite excited to use it. I think it's going to be, in the grand scheme of, I guess, Innovator of the Year internationally, it's probably quite a small innovation. But I do feel like the teams that were interested in innovating with us were really interested. So I think, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, wonderful, wonderful. Absolutely. Just a little housekeeping. We are on time. Everybody's feeling good. We got our third presenter because it kind of goes fast and it's kind of hectic, but everybody's doing good. Yes. Let's move on with our third presenters, Sarah Scott and Terry Milton from Valley Hospice Foundation, presenting Grief Library, sending resources of healing to rural Nova Scotians.
Welcome to the Valley Hospice Foundation Grief Library. Come in, take a look, browse our collection. Bonjour, hi. My name is Terry and I'm the librarian, and you should know I've just had my 73rd cup of coffee this week.
We are overwhelmed with the opportunity to share our project with this room today. I'm Sarah. My role is as a clinician specializing in grief care. And aside from our project, I would like to commission you on this day and encourage you, before you head back to the tyranny of the immediate, to pause and look through your notebook at your innovative idea, your little spark of imagination, because exactly 1 year ago today, this whole project was just a note in a sidebar at a palliative care network meeting.
So when Sarah came back home all fired up from last year's conference, I happened to be sitting on the board of the Valley Hospice Foundation. When the words grief library were spoken, I put my hand up right away and said, I volunteer. As a librarian for 25 years, and as a daughter whose mother died in hospice care, I knew we were on to something. A community hub which could sit at the heart of grief and bereavement supports.
Rural Nova Scotia faces many barriers to care, and especially grief care. Economic shifts have substantially eroded the natural grief supports in our rural communities. The lack of public transportation isolates those who can no longer drive. Adult kids move out of the province for work. And the new grief supports that are becoming available all the time today simply aren't reaching rural Nova Scotians because of a lack of internet access. But almost all Nova Scotians have a mailbox.
So fast forward a year from that initial idea, and look at us now. With foundation support, we have a collection of 200 items and growing. We are already mailing books into the hands of grievers across Nova Scotia at no charge to the borrower. We have found a welcoming and accessible physical location, which officially opened to the public on September 4th. People have heard about this grief library and are already arriving in person. People are thirsty for grief talk. Most gratifying to me as a librarian are the stories that have already come from our borrowers thanking us. Long before we launched, a school guidance counselor was grappling with their junior high students' anguish over the tragic death of a classmate. We loaned them a stack of books. They recently mailed them back with a note. I so appreciate having access to these resources. I'm working with elementary kids this year. I'm definitely going to connect with you again. A woman widowed 2.5 years ago came to us, and after borrowing some books, she wrote, I think I want to connect with other local widows. Maybe I'll lead some groups. I'm open to that.
Our community Adopt a Book campaign was completed in just one night with every book purchased. Terry had a heart attack in the morning, waking up and looking at the system because she thought the program was broken. And a significant portion of those folks who purchased books were clinicians like yourself, because you get it. You get the power of words delivered at the appropriate time, bring hope and bring healing.
A griever who lost a dear friend wrote us just this week saying, I'm very happy your little library exists. I was a bit overwhelmed visiting the first time, but you made me feel so welcome and comfortable. I found what I was looking for. Several of the titles just spoke to me. And with that email came a donation to our foundation. We are onto something.
Today, we are inviting you to pick up the pen, to vote, to write our next chapter today.
We're ready to expand. Our first mandate was bereavement grief, loss of a person. Next, other forms of grief, other types of loss, serving individuals and clinicians.
So join us today. We'd love to have you as co-authors of this story, because our library is called Grief, but really it's all about love.
So in the world of digital, a wonderful analog solution, because who here doesn't have a mailbox? Right? Love that. So, Erica, you want to ask
Yes, thank
Sarah and Terry
you.
some really hard questions?
That was excellent, very inspiring. Your love of books and knowledge and of love really comes through, and how thoughts start innovative change and foster connection. So that was so cool to hear about everything. And you really addressed, as questions came up for me, then you addressed them. So I have a fun question for you. If you had to come up with a one-word sentence or slogan to highlight the most important aspect of your service or your program, what would it be? What would be your one-word one sentence advertisement?
No, we get 2 sentences because we're 2
yes.
people.
Yes, you do. I did say
Otherwise,
one
you're
to
going to
two,
expect
I
us
do
to
two
brain meld here.
Very good point.
I would say one sentence that encapsulates what we're doing is curating empathy, cultivating community. That's what our goal is, to knit things together. It's that cultivation of grief literacy. That's a very rambled word, but you can give it a go.
Yeah, and mine is that we are building grief literacy one book at a time.
Thank you. Your heart and compassion comes through.
Wonderful, wonderful. So we have had a pediatric nurse practitioner from Kenya, a grief clinician and librarian from Nova Scotia, and an unemployed doctor from the United States. And we're halfway through. And we've had wonderful representation from remote, rural to inner city to human connections that I think most people before this would not have been thinking about. So it's really a wonderful, and we're only halfway through. So let's move on quickly with our next. I would like to introduce Dr. Richard Leader and Rachel Rush, presenting on behalf of the Palliative Story Exchange team presenting the Palliative Story Exchange.
Thank you so much. It was the spring of 2020, and we were shrouded in the dense fog of COVID's initial surge. In palliative care, we are embedded in ICUs and staffing end-of-life units, holding iPads to facilitate goodbyes. We were disoriented. We were scared. Too many of us felt alone. And now, too many of us are leaving medicine, leaving palliative care when patients and communities need us most. We urgently need new interventions to re-engage our workforce and chart our path forward. So to respond, Rachel, Alexis Drutchess, and I created an innovative storytelling framework, the Palliative Story Exchange.
Why use storytelling in this way? It's on. Thank you. Palliative care is storytelling, and storytelling is palliative care. The roots of our work are in holding space and bearing witness to the stories that our patients, their families, and communities entrust us to carry alongside them. They entrust us also to reflect back what we hear, and in doing so, to partner together to chart the way forward in their care. What if these roots are the same roots from which we can foster and sustain our collective well-being and the well-being of all who work in healthcare? That is our mission at the Palliative Story Exchange, and since 2020, we've been hosting national and international events that are doing just that.
Story Exchange is a 60 to 90-minute virtual or in-person event that combines the evidence-based benefits of active listening and reflective writing with some critical components of community co-creation as well as group reflection. Before an event, we send out a call for storytellers as well as a Google link for those interested to sign up. Rather than focusing on patient cases, we really ask potential storytellers to think about what's pulled at them or what they can't stop thinking about. We ask that all stories are written down so that no one feels worried about performing their story. On the day of, stories are told, and in between each story, we take time to reflect as a group about universal themes and what resonated. Some stories are heartbreaking, some are funny. All of them have a certain vulnerability, and each time it's a really beautiful experience.
So to date, we've had over 1,800 participants and counting from around the world, every region of the United States. We've represented an extensive breadth of professional backgrounds. And our survey data are good. They demonstrate that compared to before attending a palliative story exchange, the bars in blue, after attending a palliative story exchange, the bars in green, participants feel increased meaning in their work. They feel that participating in a facilitated storytelling exchange promotes well-being and resilience. And really impressively, they feel connected to the larger palliative care community.
And more than half of all free text responses include terms such as meaningful, healing, powerful, and universal to describe their participation. As we all know, data does not tell the whole story, so let's hear from some of our participants.
Hi, my name is Warren Lewin. I'm a palliative care physician at the University of Toronto. And I just want to say a big thank you to Ricky, Rachel, and Alexis for building such an incredible and robust program that has impacted so favorably our wellness curriculum for our fellows in palliative medicine here. Their facilitation skills are so incredible. And I think if you asked any one of our faculty or residents or fellows that had the opportunity or privilege to participate in the story exchange, they would probably say it was a highlight of their entire training, and I can't wait to see where this program goes.
My name is Manisha. I had the great privilege of being able to participate in the Palliative Story Exchange. I found it to be such a cathartic experience, just scribbling down my thoughts, unfiltered about a patient experience that really stuck with me. And then mustering up the courage to share that with complete strangers across the globe. It was just really special and reminded me of our sort of common shared humanity. I really feel very, very grateful to the organizers and creators of the Palliative Story Exchange. It was really such a special experience.
Hi, my name is Kelly and I'm a registered nurse living in Brooklyn, New York. I work in community health. My experience with the Palliative Story Exchange was as a story listener. In 2007, my partner used the Medical Aid in Dying Act in Oregon to end her life after suffering with ovarian cancer for many years. It was amazing for her to be able to do that surrounded by family and friends, but it was not as amazing how chaotic it felt. And we just didn't really understand how things were supposed to go, even though we were all well into our 30s. And to be able to hear a nurse talk about helping a family through the medical aid in dying process. And she mused at the end, I just, you always wonder if you make a difference. And then having the chance in the story talk back to say, yes, I promise you made a difference. I promise you. That healed a part of me. I don't know about the research, but it healed a part of me, my heart, that I didn't even know needed to be healed.
With your support, we hope to build a community of practice and a facilitation training guide.
So come join us and we'll write the next chapter in the story of palliative care.
Thank you.
Wow. What a wonderful example of building community in our field. Thank you for what you've done. And I believe Holly has got a question or two for you.
Okay, so me, Gwitch, Rachel, and Ricky. May I call you Ricky?
Yes,
'Cause
certainly.
I feel like we're kind of friends now, and I heard that in your talk. So first question, I have two. Are you both employed?
Actually, funny you should say.
Oh, what is going on here? Why are they giving me all the unemployed people?
I'm between positions. I just left a wonderful position at Children's LA, and next week I start as psychosocial lead at Children's Hospital Colorado on their palliative.
So you're on vacation. You're on vacation?
David and I are hanging out together.
Okay, excellent. You and Dr. Wu can hang out together. So miigwech for that. So I really like the idea of stories are everything because we are all story. And so what advice would the two of you give to other communities, nations, or countries if they wanted to implement a similar project?
Call us. No, this can be done anywhere and everywhere. It doesn't take resources. It takes a Zoom link, some legwork, some emails, and storytellers. And they're all around us. The storytellers are all around us. So I think it's about engaging the community, talk to the people around you, bring them in.
Yes, I think that with that, I would turn it back to the question asker. Where are the storytellers in your community? We are all built of story. And I think the experts lie within their own communities too. So we are always happy to offer the tools we can to partner with the expertise of those who come to us too from any part of the world.
Yeah. So thank you both. I would say you also have to have a wonderful soul to put something like that together. So thank you for what you've done. Could I have the QR code put up for the translation link? Is that possible? Thank you. So anybody in the room, if you have earbuds and a phone and you don't speak French, you'll want to download this, join the Zoom link, put in your earbud. Please don't play it on your phone because it'll cause a great deal of feedback. But you'll want this link for real live translation for our next presentation. And I hear some meeting in progress. So but please don't play it on your phone, only if you have earbuds or can really silence your phone. All right. So thank you all for doing that. We want to make sure everybody can participate and follow this next presentation, which is absolutely going to be wonderful, as they all have been. So with that, are we ready? We're all ready? Okay. Then I would love to introduce Dr. Adriana Cote from the University of Montreal, presenting Creation of the Play, If One Day I Die.
Attention, attention, code bleu, chambre 602, code bleu, chambre 602. Papa? Papa? S'il vous plaît, allez dans le salon des familles, on va voir avec eux. S'il vous plaît, au revoir. Attention, attention, code bleu, chambre 602, code bleu, chambre 602. Allez, fermez la fenêtre. On va demander la suite de votre fenêtre. Fermez la fenêtre.
Ceci est la première scène de la pièce de théâtre qui s'intitule « Si un jour je meurs ». Comme médecin de soins palliatifs, cette mort-là, c'est probablement celle que je redoute le plus, pour moi, mais surtout pour mes patients si j'ai été atteint d'une maladie grave et avancée. Si vous êtes comme moi puis que vous préférez davantage la seconde image pour illustrer votre fin de vie que vous espérez la plus lointaine possible, les soins palliatifs vont devenir un jour ou l'autre votre plus grand allié. Pourtant, le plus grand frein à l'accès aux soins palliatifs, c'est probablement la méconnaissance de ce dont il s'agit, en plus du mythe collectif qui perdure entourant la mort. C'est donc en vue d'exposer les citoyens et les professionnels de la santé aux défis qu'implique la transition vers les soins palliatifs, en dehors de rapports de recherche ou d'articles scientifiques, que nous avons créé le laboratoire créatif sur la fin de vie.
Bonjour Mélanie, c'est Andréane. Écoute, j'ai une idée de projet un peu fou. Est-ce que tu as quelques minutes pour que je t'en parle?
OK, oui, je t'écoute.
Je reviens d'une formation à Toronto sur les méthodes de recherche, puis j'ai été exposée aux méthodologies de recherche basées sur l'art. Ça m'a appelé. En particulier le Theater-Based Research.
Oui, oui, j'en ai déjà entendu parler, mais dis-moi en plus.
J'aurais envie de co-créer une pièce de théâtre qui parle de soins palliatifs au grand public.
OK, ouais, comme une œuvre qui pourrait conscientiser à la fin de vie puis aux discussions que ça implique. Peut-être que ça pourrait aussi s'adresser aux étudiants de profession de la santé ou aux sciences humaines et sociales. Dans ce cas-là, j'embarque.
Dès cet instant, il était clair pour Mélanie et moi que notre intention était double dans un tel projet de recherche-création. Toucher les gens et les faire réfléchir. Ce qu'on voulait aussi, c'était créer un projet transdisciplinaire où les sciences de la santé, les sciences sociales, la psychologie, les sciences de l'éducation allaient alimenter le feu de l'art théâtral. Pour y arriver, on s'est entouré d'une équipe formidable composée de chercheurs, auteurs, metteurs en scène, comédiens, concepteurs de décors, de costumes, d'éclairage. Il y a eu aussi beaucoup de partenaires de l'ombre, des patients, des proches aidants, des endeuillés, des professionnels qui ont à tour de rôle commenté les différentes versions du texte. C'est pour ça qu'on parle de projet de recherche-création. À partir du premier moment où la pièce a été diffusée en web diffusion, en lecture publique à l'automne 2020, la pièce a par la suite été montée, captée, et c'est la vidéo-captation qui circule maintenant et elle a été vue par près d'1 millier de personnes. On l'a présentée dans des centres communautaires, des centres culturels, des bibliothèques, dans des auditoriums d'hôpitaux. On l'a aussi présenté dans le cadre de formation à des bénévoles en soins palliatifs, aussi à des étudiants en médecine, en sciences infirmières, en travail social, en psychologie et en bioéthique. À la précédente diapo, il y avait du son où Mélanie nous exposait les différents résultats du projet de recherche, à savoir qu'il y a eu une amélioration statistiquement significative du niveau de connaissance et du niveau d'intérêt à l'égard des soins palliatifs. Ce qu'on a aussi trouvé intéressant, c'est quand on a posé la question aux participants, est-ce que vous trouvez que le théâtre représente une bonne façon d'apprendre par rapport à des enjeux complexes comme les soins palliatifs? Mais la réponse était assez évidente, assurément, dans la plupart des cas. Maintenant, parce qu'une image vaut 1000 mots, laissez-moi vous présenter l'histoire de Marie et de Marcel à travers un vidéomontage, leur histoire ainsi que celle de leurs proches, de leurs soignants. Bien que ces histoires-là paraissent différentes à tout point de vue ou en apparence singulières, il en demeure pas moins qu'elles ont réussi à toucher le cœur des gens parce qu'elles ont touché à quelque chose d'essentiel. Alors la pièce « Si un jour je meurs » l'a montré, les soins palliatifs, on ne meurt pas d'en parler.
ont envie de parler de ça, ça fait que j'appelle personne.
On va se mettre la tête de pancréas. Ça sert à rien, pancréas.
Puis, je sais que c'est confrontant de parler de la mort. Mais si on le fait pas, si on se prépare pas, ben c'est nos proches qui vont écoper.
Je vous remercie beaucoup de votre attention.
So even though we have different languages, art transcends what's most important. Yes, thank you for your work. Yes, thank you. So I believe, Bridget, you have a question.
Yes, and I'm going to ask you questions in English. I wouldn't really want to give people my French. I think that we would alienate the audience. It's fascinating, lovely project. Thank you very much. But how are you going to sell your project to non-creative people? Because I think there's some non-creative people who get a bit afraid of people using arts as a way of disseminating aspects of care. So sell it to some non-creative people.
En fait, je pense que encore plus que les gens qui sont réticents à l'art, les gens qui sont réticents à parler de soins palliatifs sont encore plus nombreux. Et j'ai trouvé que l'art était un bon hook pour eux, pour les faire venir. Des fois, c'est par l'entremise d'un proche qui ressentait le besoin de parler de ce sujet-là avec un parent malade, par exemple, qui l'ont amené à la représentation. Puis, à travers la discussion suite à la présentation, ça a donné lieu à une foule de discussions. Mais vous avez raison, encore faut-il que les gens se présentent à l'événement puis aient envie d'être ouverts. Mais ceux qui l'ont fait, même à reculons, c'est ceux qui ont pris la parole le plus fort pour exprimer leur joie d'avoir partagé ce petit moment-là.
Thank you, thank you, and thank you, everybody. Round of applause. Thank you so much. Such beautiful work. I'm happy to present our sixth and last presenters. Presenting Julia St. Louis Sick Kids Hospital. I'm good, but I don't want to hear myself. There we go. Thank you. So presenting Reality Check, using virtual reality social support for adolescents living with serious illness.
Hello? Perfect. Hi, I'm Julia. I'm a registered nurse, a PhD student, and a researcher with the Pediatric Advanced Care Team at the Hospital for Sick Children. As part of my role, I conduct research about how to help teens who are living with serious illness. More importantly, I'd like to introduce you to Sally. When Sally and I talk, she doesn't tell me about her pain, that she's relapsed again, or that she's going to have to lose her hair again. She tells me about how difficult it is to be known as the cancer kid at school. She tells me that it's really hard to make friends when she's always on cancer leave, and that no one she meets at school really gets what she's gone through. Sally is not alone in these feelings. Many of the kids we care for at PACT have expressed the same things, and so we set out to test an intervention to see if we could help them feel less alone. I'm going to invite you to take a minute to think back to what it felt like in your brain and your body to be a teenager. Yeah, adolescence is really, really tough. I'm seeing some thumbs downs in the audience. Young people need time and space to begin to develop their own identities, explore the world on their own, and focus on their friendships. Serious illness gets in the way of a lot of this. frequent appointments, feeling unwell, missing a lot of school, and needing a lot of care from adults is really hard on teens. We interviewed teens before the intervention about their experiences of living with serious illness, and I'll let them share those with you in their own words.
I don't get to talk to kids my own age a lot. I'm not able to get out or do anything, so I'm very lonely. And I can't really move around the house. I need a nurse to watch over me all the time. An adult, so I'm not able to play or do anything like that. It's just harder now because I can't really leave the house, and it's hard to explain what's going on in my life to other people because they don't understand.
I'm barely around because I'm always on cancer leave, so it's hard to make any friends.
As you can see, many of the kids that PACT cares for are feeling isolated, lonely, and surrounded by adults. We know that teens with strong peer relationships have increased levels of resilience and strong protections against mental health problems. We could see that so many of the teens that we cared for felt the same way, but they were all isolated from each other. They just needed a safe place to connect. We decided to test an intervention to get them together and hopefully help them to feel less alone. Every week, Shandy, our amazing child life specialist at the PACT team, conducts a 1-hour social support group in this virtual reality space. Teens can sit around the campfire, roast marshmallows, drink hot chocolate, and share about their life, who they are, and their connection to sick kids. Teens share about what's going on in their lives at the moment, anything from a new chemo protocol to an upcoming really tough math test, and they can validate each other's experiences. They can hang out in this space, at the beach, in the dog park, or on the rooftop. We found that teens have created a really nice balance of digging into the tough stuff together, as well as having fun, play, and silliness. They go to the dog park, throw sticks, make small groups, and do activities together in the virtual space. Teens have told us that it's really enjoyable to move around the virtual space without the physical limitations that they might experience as a result of their illness. We conducted a 6-month pilot study of feasibility and impact. We wanted to find out what worked and what didn't, and we interviewed teens up to 6 times during the study.
It was not at all difficult.
Teens told us that it was really easy to learn how to use VR. They could troubleshoot any technical difficulties on their own pretty quickly, usually by finding a YouTube video that told them what to do. Teens told us that it felt realistic being inside the VR space. One teen told us that it felt like she had gone inside her iPad.
It makes you feel like you're not alone.
Teens told us that the group helped them to feel braver, make friends, laugh, do fun things, and feel more connected and less isolated. They told us that it felt like they just fit together. Their shared experiences helped them to form unique and really meaningful connections.
My character could be whoever, and we can do all kinds of things.
Teens told us that it was really convenient to not have to commute somewhere and sit in a boardroom, twiddling their thumbs and staring at each other. They said that it was really nice that they could join from anywhere with Wi-Fi, home or hospital. They told us that they really appreciated not having to worry about their appearance. Teens with serious illness often really struggle with their body image, and so they had a lot of fun picking avatars. Some teens had their avatars look like themselves, but maybe added earrings that they couldn't have in their day-to-day lives, and other teens built their avatars to look like their fantasy selves. In conclusion, virtual reality felt like a safe space to share, have fun, and take a break from serious illness. With this technology, the possibilities are limitless. Teens and their parents were really happy with the intervention and wanted more. Moving forward, we're looking forward to expanding this work with more VR devices, more participants, and more research. Thank you for your attention, and thank you to the many sponsors who've made this work possible.
Thank you, Julia, for presenting and for the work, and just absolutely, we've gone from super analog and to super technical. Unbelievable. So fantastic. And I believe, Erica, you've got a question.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was really neat to see the visuals and how that would add, like, sort of taking kids out of an online support group where they're maybe typing or Zooming into this virtual reality. I found myself thinking about parents and parents like concerns with technology, which may be different when they have a kid who dealing with a serious illness, but just curious to say, like, what would be your selling bit to parents about the technology piece of virtual reality?
That's a great question. We didn't really, actually, we did experience some kind of hesitation from parents, but I think that, you know, parents, even our more hesitant ones, were just so keen to get their kids socializing after maybe a period of being in the hospital, that they were willing to kind of accept the risks that they were worried about. And so, you know, offering them the opportunity to like supervise the first few, as well as it's a safe intervention. Like, so yeah, there was limited issues with that. Yeah, thank you.
Great, thank you.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you, Drew. So that brings us to a very important time in the Innovation Challenge, and that is voting. And yes, we need the voting music. And what I would encourage each of you to do, as you are with your phones, is to take the QR code and follow the yellow link that appears on your screen and vote for your favorite innovation. You can only vote once, and you'll only have 90 seconds to vote. And I just want to say that employment status should not impact your vote.
But I need the money.
But yeah, but Dr. Wu says, I need the money. Yeah, so anyways. Anybody having trouble, please let us know. Otherwise, we'll give you 90 seconds for your voting. The judges are diligently tallying their scores, and they will be collaborating on who they believe will be the innovator of the year for 2024. All right, judges, are you guys getting your tallies down, Erica? Yeah. Oh, you're going behind this. You going somewhere? There's nowhere to go. You are locked in. They'd like the lights turned off up front so that they can be in total privacy. Everybody's getting the voting down. Yes, I could ask you who you voted for, but I won't. Don't want to put you on this. What's that? No. We don't want to influence others. Don't want to influence others. Yeah. So one of the things you can be thinking about as you've been here today, the truth of the matter is, as you heard from one of our presenters, is their innovation started in the margins of this conference in the hallway, talking with somebody else. And so I imagine each and every one of you do innovative things, and there'll be a call for the 2026 Innovation Challenge. So watch for it. All right, got to check on our judges here. When do you want to do the iPad draw? Well, when do you want to do the? Oh, so you already gave it.
No,
Okay, but I should probably announce. Okay. But I'm going to check on the judges real quick. Make sure this is a fair process. How are you doing, judges? Oh, you got plenty of time, plenty of time. You doing all right? Okay. Yes. And we've got to have are you tallying the online? Oh my goodness, we've got the tally for the online. Top secret right here. What you got? Okay. Yeah. This is virtual hospice drawing. or the iPad? Apple Watch. Okay. Right. I'm seeing some results here. Thank you for voting. How many votes do we have in total online? We've had 99 votes online. Thank you very much. Yes. Wonderful job. So the Canadian Virtual Hospice does a lot of things for the Congress. And one of the things they did this year was a drawing for an Apple Watch. And the drawing has taken place, and the winner is Vivian Stang. And we understand that Vivian already had to leave and that she will receive her Apple Watch back in Ottawa. So that was the drawing. So round of applause for Vivian and her new Apple Watch. So are we ready? Are we ready to give the judges the audience input? Oh my goodness. Voting for you all have closed. Thank you for voting. Now we're going to try and prejudice the judges with your voting. And in just the next 2 or 3 minutes, we will be handing out the awards right here. You don't want to miss that. As I mentioned, everybody that was selected for this was a winner just by nature of being selected. How y'all doing? Oh. So the judges are still deliberating, coming to terms with who they selected, and now comparing their results with yours as an audience. And in a moment, we'll have the final results. Are you getting excited? You're excited? All right. Oh, so we've got some deliberations going on here. The judges are not all on the same page yet right now. Yes. So no. So your input really makes a difference here, because the judges didn't all come to the same conclusion, and your input's going to help direct them, I think. But let's be honest. It's really hard to select between 6 wonderful innovations. Yeah. So Bridget says they've decided. Are you sure about that? Everybody, you're good? So let me check and see how this all comes down here. By the way, I don't get to vote. I don't get to vote. You guys think I should have a vote? No, I gotta know. Didn't you want to think about that a little bit? I mean, that was immediate. Just want to make sure that I am comfortable with the selection. Yes. So everybody, the moment you've all been waiting for. I'm going to ask the judges to come forward with the prizes. I'm going to ask all of our participants to come forward, and we're going to just be really cozy up front here. Yes, it's like American Idol. That's right. There you go. But and full disclosure, when Shelley and I first talked about this several years ago, we were thinking about Shark Tank, actually. So we have everybody up front. Oh, can we do something different with the lights? Can we have lights on the screen? On the people, I mean? Everybody pull out your phone and shine your lights. I mean, innovation. We've got to have better lights, guys. Let's go ahead and turn on the lights. Room lights, whatever lights. Let there be light. Hey, there we go. Okay, you can put away your phones now. So, I so appreciate you all being here. It is my pleasure to introduce and for Bridget Johnson to present the second runner-up, or otherwise known as third place. I know we all talk about those things differently. To Dr. Andrea Cote from Montreal. If One Day I Die. Wonderful. Yes, wonderful. Which brings us to the first runner-up, also known as second place, thank you. Being presented by Erica with the trophy this year at the 2024 Innovation Challenge. The second place winner is Julia St. Louis, Reality Check. Well, it's been a great afternoon. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of the conference. And presenting the winner, right? The Innovator of the Year 2024 is Holly Prince, previous #1 winner, Innovator of the Award in, what year was that? 2018, yes. You want to know who it is? Holly is presenting Sarah Scott and Terry Milton with Grief Library, sending resources of healing to rural Nova Scotians. So with that being said, I want to thank a few people. Shelley Corey, Canadian Virtual Hospice, for the idea and inspiration. All the applicants that did it and the finalists in front of you. Our judges, our review panel, and the McGill Palliative Care Conference and conference organizers. And we hope to see you for the 2026 Innovation Challenge. Awesome. We need to do some pictures.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the plenary for 2 o'clock, not plenary, the workshop. My name is Parissa Shargi. I'm a palliative care physician working at St. Mary's Hospital here in Montreal. I'm pleased today to introduce Dr. Mellor Davis, who will be talking today about ASCO-MASCC E-Delphi expert consensus guidance on opioid analgesic conversions in patients with cancer-related pain. Dr. Davis is a board-certified and fellowship-trained specialist in hospice and palliative medicine. His clinical interests include hematology-oncology. His research interests include cancer pain, cancer palliation, cancer-related fatigue, patient communication, opioids, quality of life and symptom assessment. Dr. Davies obtained his medical degree from The Ohio State University. He completed his residency at Riverside Methodist Hospital, then completed a fellowship in hematology and oncology at the Mayo Clinic, Rochester. Dr. Davies is certified by the American Board of Internal Medicine in Hematology, Medical Oncology, and Hospice and Palliative Medicine. So I'll leave the microphone to Dr. Davies. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to present at the conference. This is kind of a late entry in that sense, and so you don't have the direction or the objectives, but I'll give you objectives with this. And I hope this will take about 30 or 40 minutes, and then I think having interaction would be helpful. So we're going to talk about what we did prior to the Delphi. We've finished the Delphi, and it's actually well. Let me go back. About 2 or 3 years ago, we convened a panel. Here, I don't have any relationships, no commercial support, unfortunately. So here's what we're going to look at as far as learning objectives. So we're going to recognize the difference between conversion tables and equal analgesia. We're going to be able to interpret the results and strengths of conversion ratios based on a systematic review of 140 randomized controlled trials and 68 non-randomized controlled trials. And we'll give directions on conversion ratios based on the evidence. And then we're going to open it up and talk probably even more about the gaps that occur than what we do know from it. So the CAN meds, this would be patient outcomes and safety, which are ultimate, obviously, in conversion ratios. And as medical experts, applying clinical skills and knowledge of the biomedical sciences to fulfill your scope of practice. So clinicians regularly prescribe opioids. So we all prescribe opioids, and most patients respond, but about 20 to 40% of patients either respond poorly, they develop side effects, or they lose analgesic effects of the first opioid, and hence they need to be rotated. And obviously opioids are used not only in cancer, though we're focusing on cancer, less so in chronic non-cancer pain, but obviously postoperative pain, and the clinical efficacy may be suboptimal in some patients. And as you and I know, it's very difficult to predict who's going to respond to what and what to use, because they don't come with that stamped on their, on their shoulder or on their hand about what works and doesn't work. Therefore, we looked at a scoping review of opioid conversions to inform an international guideline. Part of this is about 2 or 3 years ago, we at MASCC, that's the Multinational Association of Supportive Care in Cancer, did a survey of 370 responders from 53 different countries. And we asked them what their conversion ratios were. This was led by Akila Reedy. And what we found is there was a significant difference in conversion ratios that were found between opioids across regions and across countries. And so this became a major work. I am a member of MASCC, so we wanted to at least try to get an international consensus of what conversion ratios were so that future research could be done. So trying to define this. So what we did is we convened a panel of 14 national and international experts, decided to look at a systematic review, which I'm going to go over with you with this and what our findings were. And we found that it wasn't strong enough. It wasn't level 1 evidence that one could then develop a conversion ratio table. So we decided, therefore, to do a Delphi process, and we developed agreement with the American Society of Clinical Oncology, MASCC, the American Association of Hospice and Palliative Medicine, the Hospice and Palliative Nurse Association, and also the National Italian Group. So they all signed on to be into this guideline, and we're almost done. ASCO just recently looked at it. The AHPM is looking at it next week. So it's embargoed in that sense. What we found is we had 58 statements that were accepted internationally. The international group consisted of 41 national experts from all sorts of different countries. And the consensus required 75% agreement with each of the statements, and that will be coming out in the future. But what I'm going to do is go through the systematic review, and then what I hope to do is open this up and maybe even discuss what the gaps are with what we're doing. So we did a search, Medline, Ovid, from 1946 to 2022, the ABA, PsycInfo from 1806 to June 3rd week, 2022, the evidence-based Cochrane reviews from 2005 to 2022. We looked at registered trials. We looked at LILAC, IMER, INSEAR, AIM, and WPRM. Don't ask me what that means. My librarian did that, so I can't tell you what each of those are. And then we did individual searches on Google Scholar. And then we looked at all the abstracts that we got. We looked at every abstract. So we read each of the abstracts that occur. We collated them into individual files. So it was a lot of reading because it was about 21,000 abstracts that we went through to get these in addition to the hand searches. And we came up with 140 randomized controlled trials and 68 non-randomized controlled trials. We didn't take single studies, in other words, just prospective studies. We didn't take case reports, etc. So they had to have a comparator in that sense with it. And it involved over 50,000 patients in these 208 trials that we looked at. So because this is a MASCC study, we didn't use the grade. We used the MASCC guidelines for evidence. And I'll go over these. The level 1 evidence level 1 evidence is obtained from meta-analysis of multiple well-designed controlled trials, randomized trials with low false positivity and false negativity, and we couldn't find really any of those. So the level of evidence that we have is largely level 2 evidence. Level 2 evidence is obtained from at least one well-designed experimental study, randomized trials with high false positive or false negative error, having low power. Now, most of the trials, as you would imagine, were not blinded. You can't really blind it in palliative care if you're doing a pre-post. In other words, someone needs to be rotated and you're trying to compare, for instance, responses of one opioid to another. And in parallel designs, most of which were post-operative studies, they were shorter, but they weren't blinded. So, and oftentimes you didn't know who was assessing the response. Was it one of the researchers or was it blindly assessed? So it was difficult. And so most of the evidence, I would say, is low to very low in that regard. So what we were looking for is replicability. In other words, the ability to repeat the same finding in independent studies would probably be the strongest evidence that we would find. We didn't use quasi-experimental studies, so we didn't include level 3, 4, or 5. So then there's second grade. Grade A means that you have at least consistent findings. Since we were sticking with level 2 evidence, you had to have a ratio that was in approximately the same area. Level B means that there were, it was generally consistent, but may have been widespread, a little bit wider spread. Level C is inconsistent, and level D is there's no systematic empiric evidence available. So largely, it was largely A or generally consistent or level C in that regard. So here are the conversion ratios that we found for it. So the morphine to oxycodone was 1.4 to 1, with a range of 1 to 1 to 2 to 1. We'll go over some of the published literature in that regard. The morphine to hydromorphone was 5 to 1, but ranged from 3.18 to 8.1. But most of the studies were in the range of 5 to 6. There were very few studies, only 2 studies that really compared morphine to hydrocodone, and morphine was less potent than hydrocodone, so it was 1.25 to 1 to 1.5 to 1. The tramadol, the morphine to tramadol, interesting enough, was 1 to 4, but wide-ranging, ranging from 1 to 2.6 to 1 to 10, and I think that has to do with the patient population, whether it was neuropathic or not. So tramadol actually may be more potent relative to morphine in a population of patients that have neuropathic pain. The tapentadol and morphine ratio, there were only a couple studies. It was 1 to 3.3 with a range of 1 to 2.5 to 1 to 4.5. Now, the morphine to transdermal fentanyl was 80 to 1, but you can see the large range that occurs, 118 to 1 to 57 to 1. And I think that's because fentanyl is so erratically absorbed and may have something to do with skin genetics, that there is a wide range when you see this. It is also true for morphine to transdermal buprenorphine. It was 107 to 1, but a range of 120 to 1 to 37 to 1. So wide ranging. And again, I don't know whether this is absorption of buprenorphine. My sense is it probably is, because when you look at the ratio of IV morphine to IV buprenorphine, it's very narrow. So my sense is that this has to do with transdermal absorption that occurs. So when you look at sublingual buprenorphine to morphine, and there were several studies, it's fairly strong. It's about 50 to 1 and very consistent. And you'll find that when we go to the IV drugs. And then when you look at oxymorphone, it's fairly wide when you look at morphine to oxymorphone. When you look at oxycodone to hydromorphone, it's 2.5 to 1, about half of what it is to hydromorphone, with a range of 1.6 to 1 to 4.8 to 1. And you look at oxycodone to hydrocodone, it's 1 to 1.5, with a range of 1 to 1 to 1 to 2. When you look at oxycodone to tramadol, it's 1 to 10. And when you look at tapentadol, and this is probably the one that has the largest number of studies, it's 1 to 5.8, but a range of 1 to 5 to 1 to 10, but almost always around 1 to 5. There are about 14 randomized trials in that comparison, which was largely commercially driven. When you look at oxycodone to tramadol, it's 67 to 1, with a range, again, of 150 to 1 to 29 to 1, wide ranging that occurs with it. And you can see the same that occurs with transdermal buprenorphine. It's 45 to 1, but it's large ranging from 83 to 1 to 29 to 1. But when you look at oxycodone to sublingual buprenorphine, it's about 34 to 1. It's about 30 to 1 when you look at that. And there are a few trials looking at oxycodone to oxymorphone. It's 2 to 1 to 1.95 to 1, fairly close when you look at it. But when you look at overall, there are a lot of non-comparisons. So there's no comparison between hydromorphone and hydrocodone. There's nothing published that we could find. There's no comparison between hydromorphone and tramadol. There's no comparison between hydromorphone and tapentadol. There's no comparison between transdermal fentanyl and hydromorphone. And there's no comparison between transdermal buprenorphine and hydromorphone or sublingual buprenorphine and hydromorphone. So you end up, if you're using hydromorphone, guessing when you get outside of morphine in that regard. And so you're using MEDDs, and we'll talk about using MEDDs because that can be a real problem that occurs. And you can see that again with hydrocodone. There is some comparison between hydrocodone and tramadol. It's about 1 to 7.5 to 1 to 7.6. There are only 2 studies. And hydrocodone to transdermal buprenorphine is 62.5 to 1. But no other really comparisons. There are a few between tramadol and transdermal buprenorphine, which are obviously fairly high, 650 to 1 and 500 to 1, and between tapentadol and transdermal fentanyl. Again, pretty, it's about 330 to 1 to 269 to 1. And with transdermal buprenorphine, it's 210 to 1 to 269 to 1. So that's what we have. So there's a lot of comparison with phenanthrene, a lot of work that's been done with morphine, some obviously work with oxycodone, but there's large holes, there's large gaps. So if patients are on hydromorphone or hydrocodone, it's hard to know what to switch to if you wanted to go transdermal fentanyl, transdermal buprenorphine, sublingual buprenorphine, or in that regard. So let's look at the intravenous. So again, morphine ends up being the comparator. You'll find morphine to oxycodone was 1-to-1, but it ranges between 1.6 to 1 to 1 to 1.5. Hydromorphone to morphine, or morphine to hydromorphone is, or morphone is 5 to 1 with a range of 5 to 1 to 9.1, but most of it's centered around 5. It's usually, you're going to find that most of the studies were in that range. When you look at morphine to tramadol IV, interesting enough, it's 1 to 11, but a range of 1 to 10 to 1 to 22. The outlier was the 1 to 22. Most all of them were around 1 to 10. And when you look at IV morphine to IV fentanyl, it's 68 to 1, but a range of 100 to 1 to 43 to 1. The outlier is 43 to 1. But when you look at IV buprenorphine to morphine, there are 5 studies. It's very close. It's 33 to 1. It's almost a 30 to 1. There are 5 studies fairly close in that regard. And then the oxymorphone to morphine was 8.7 to 1, and which goes along with the older literature. When you look at oxycodone to tramadol, it's about 1 to 8 to 1 to 10. When you look at fentanyl to oxycodone, it's 75 to 1, which is interesting, with a range of 100 to 1 to 50 to 1. And there is a comparison between IV fentanyl and IV hydromorphone, which was 13 to 1 to 16 to 1, and between IV tramadol and IV fentanyl, which was 876 to 1 to 1,000 to 1. And IV tramadol to IV buprenorphine was greater than 660 to 1. And between fentanyl and oxycodone, it was 1 to 7.5, but that's what you have. That's what we have. So if you were trying to compare IV oxycodone, which we don't have in the United States, to hydromorphone, there is no literature. If you try to use hydromorphone or tramadol to hydromorphone, there is no literature. If you tried to look at hydromorphone to buprenorphine, there is no comparison that you have for it. So some of the common or things that you may think about, you really don't have much direction in. So there are gaps when you look at this. So let's look at the methadone conversion. Now, there are 18 studies. So this is the first page. I'll show you the other page. So some look fairly clean. So when you look at the top study from 2011, 4 to 1, 4 to 6 to 1, 7.5 to 8 to 1 to 10 to 11 to 1. So that set up an idea that, you know, there is a difference, that methadone appears more potent as you go up on the morphine dose. So that looked pretty good. You can see the number of individuals that were involved. But as you move along, for instance, at the bottom, Lucan's study, it was 3.3 to 1, which is not bad. It's less than 100 milligrams of morphine in a day. It's about 3.3 to 1, 4 to 1. You have one from Sebastiano that was 6.9 to 1. But then you have 10 to 1 at greater than 300, 19 to 1 when you get over 300, and 22 to 1 with a similar population. So you get this wide range, and so it becomes, as the morphine dose goes up, the conversion ratio becomes less and less accurate and wider ranging. So what we think is, you know, it's, 4 to 1, 8 to 1, 12 to 1 at these levels. It's much more wide ranging than you realize. These are the other of the 18 studies. You can see at least one study didn't find any difference with the dose of it. You can see the Mercandati was 4-to-1, 8-to-1, 12-to-1, but he previously reported it was 6.9-to-1 at less than 100 milligrams. But you see this wide ranging that occurs. The 2009 study at the top found a range of 4.9 to 9.1 at greater than 300 MEDD. So I think the message that this shows is that as you get further and higher in the dose of morphine, you become less and less accurate in your conversion ratios. You have much more difficulty in converting, which may actually, in my thinking, influence the strategy that you use to convert to methadone. And what I mean by that, if you're less and less accurate and you don't really know at higher doses, then going to a PRN schedule like the Morley-Macon schedule that was published in 2000 or in 1998 seems actually a more reasonable, dosing patients based upon need rather than on a conversion table that is very inaccurate. So despite the widespread practice of opioid conversion to optimize analgesia and minimize adverse effects, high-quality evidence supporting these conversions is surprisingly lacking. Now, I've never said equal analgesia, and there's a reason why. The tables are not equal analgesia, and this is one of the things that the panel really wanted to bring out, because the conversion ratios is the window between toxicity and underdosing patients. It is the safe area. In the United States, we would say you're in the ballpark, but you need to adjust it to the individual. Now, this came home to me in reading a book by Nathan B. Eddy in studies that were published in 1931. Now, one of the ways that they looked at conversion is what dose would reduce withdrawal from morphine. So what they did is they took people, they withdrew them from morphine, and then what dose of, for instance, codeine would prevent opioid withdrawal if I reduced that. So they did conversion ratios, interesting enough, based upon withdrawal, and they found that codeine, about 8 milligrams or more per 1 milligram of morphine, blocked morphine-induced withdrawal. And when they withdrew people from morphine and then gave them oxycodone, it took about 1 milligram to milligram, a little bit more than that, 1 milligram to milligram to block morphine withdrawal. And when they withdrew them from morphine and gave them hydromorphone, they found that the ratio was 1:4, that it took just 1/4 of a milligram of hydromorphone to block the withdrawal from 1 milligram of morphine. So it was just like our conversion ratios. So this taught me basically is these ratios are the safe ratios. And when I started in palliative medicine in 1996, guess who taught me that? It's Robert Twycross. He said, it's the safe dose. It is not the analgesic dose. And so the panel said we will not use equal analgesia, we will use conversion ratios because it is the window that is safe for the majority of patients. It's the window that is safe for the majority of patients. So there's low-lying evidence, and we have to go with what the evidence that we have. So randomized trials, for instance, studies with crossover reported different conversion ratios than randomized parallel studies. Now, is that the effect of a previously bound opioid on a receptor and then you switch them? Are you changing, for instance, the milieu of the patient in doing that? A significant number of studies were underpowered. As I showed you in the methadone, they were really quite small. So the wide ranging may be because you don't have enough people on that study to know really what the ratio is. The wider the range, you'll have more variability, obviously, with smaller studies that are occurred. The initial conversion ratio by Ray Hood was developed by Nathan B. Eddy, and it's an interesting thing, and you probably ought to read some of his studies. His nurse was actually the one who was most important in these studies, by the way, is he would use a single high dose, low dose of the comparator to a single high dose and low dose to morphine. That was the standard way of doing that, and they would compare analgesia with that, but they were single dose. They were not at steady state when they were originally developed. So when they were looking at morphine and methadone, they thought it was 1-to-1. And if you look in the postoperative literature, in which on average it's 3 days when they're on methadone and they're is that the ratio is either 1-to-1 to 1-to-3 when you look at the postoperative literature. That's because methadone is not at steady state. So if you look at cancer patients like we looked at before, you see this wide range that occurs, that morphine appears to be, or methadone appears to be more potent the longer you get out, and the higher the dose. It's because they were on a longer period of time that occurs. So some of the studies didn't reach steady state, and you would see that in the postoperative setting. The other, I must say, is not everyone used numerical rating scales. Most of them did, but many of them use pain relief scales. Now, pain relief is very close to addiction. So the pathway of pain relief can be a rewarding, it goes along the rewarding pathway. So pain relief may actually not be equivalent to a numerical rating scale that you are looking for severity. So you have to be careful about what scale you're using. The conversion ratio between morphine and methadone for acute pain, as I mentioned in the perioperative setting, was 1-to-3-to-1. And when I started in Oxford in 1996, we didn't know the ratio on that. And so we were attempting to figure that out. And it wasn't until we were, further down the line, for instance, that we understood the differences that occurred. So finding the dose early was difficult. So when I started dosing methadone, we used the Morley-Macon, which was 10% of the morphine dose delivered every 3 hours as needed, up to 30 milligrams. And it was a way of finding the dose, but people varied quite differently in that regard. And although there are differences in methadone conversion ratios with morphine, it's not nearly as robust in real life as it appears in recommendations. So you see this nice, clean recommendations, and I'll show you what it looks like, these recommendations. But in real life, it's really messy. So this is a study that was done by Wen et al. And they took 32 different tables and they put them together. So we'll compare what we did with what these tables, and they're actually relatively close. So we didn't look at codeine, but the morphine to tramadol was ranged from, the potency was 4 to 10, which means it's 1. Potency is the inverse of equal analgesia, so to speak, or of the conversion ratio. So it was 4 to 10, which if you do see that, it's 1 to 4.4 to 10. That's exactly what we got when we were looking at the randomized trials. If you look at morphine to hydrocodone, the potency ratio is 0.67 to 1, which converts to 1 of morphine to 1.5 of hydromorphone or of hydrocodone. Very similar, very, very similar to occurred. If you looked at the oxycodone, it was 0.67 to 1, which came out to 1 of morphine, 1.5 of morphine to 1 of oxycodone in the conversion ratios. And if you look at morphine to hydromorphone, they had a range of 4 to 6.6 to 1. So that actually it came out very close to what we came up to. And I think that those conversion ratios are fairly strong in the sense of consistency. Even though the studies are weak, replicability, I think, is the key to knowledge. Not a single study, but the fact that you get the same ratio that I get, that the other person gets, etc. So this was an IV dose. This was looking at IV potencies in patient-controlled analgesia, and this was a network analysis. And we'll look and see, and we'll compare that to what we got. So here's the intravenous buprenorphine to morphine. Look at that. It's almost exactly what we got, 1 to 36. So that ratio to me is fairly strong. Would I feel comfortable going from IV morphine of 36 milligrams or 30 milligrams to 1 of buprenorphine? The answer is yes. I think that the literature is pretty consistent. The fentanyl to morphine was 1 to 57.52, but you can see the wide range that occurs. You can see the hydromorphone to morphine was, we had about 1 to 5. They had about 1 to 6.46. We don't have much oxymorphone, but you can see that. The oxycodone to morphine was about what we got. And then the tramadol to morphine was about what we got. We were 11 to 1, and they were 12.5 to 1. So no one leave the room and tell people that you're seeing this, okay? So this is, but I'll show you the conversion ratios that the expert showed. I'm not showing you the whole Delphi. The Delphi is embargoed, but at least I'll let you see what they came up with. So the morphine to oxycodone was 1.5 to 1. We had 2 statements. You can see oral oxycodone to oral morphine is that they also agreed that it is in a range of 1 to 1 to 1.2. But we also got agreement that it was 1.5 to 1. The oral morphine to oral hydromorphone was 5 to 1. The oral morphine to oxymorphone was 3 to 1. The parenteral morphine to parenteral alfentanil is 10 to 1. Now, you could say, I don't use that. And it was only a subset of patients or a subset of the experts that did, but it was a consistent finding that they had. The oral oxycodone to oral oxymorphone was 2 to 1. Not everyone has oxymorphone, so you have to realize it's a subset of the experts that have that. The oral oxycodone to IV oxycodone was 2 to 1. The oral oxycodone to oral tramadol was 1 to 5. The oral hydrocodone to oral morphine was 1 to 1. A little bit different than what we found. We thought that hydrocodone was a bit more potent than that. The oral hydrocodone to oral oxycodone was 1.5 to 1. The oral tramadol to oral morphine was 10 to 1, was accepted rather than that range of 4 to 10 to 1. The oral codeine to hydrocodone was 8 to 1. The tapentadol to morphine was 3 to 1. And the subcutaneous infusions, you go 1 to 1. So above, this is a collection of recommendations for using methadone in relationship to the morphine dose. So less than 100 milligrams of morphine, 101 to 300, 301 to 600, greater than 600 to 1. So the Australians, it's 3 to 1, 5 to 1, 10 to 1, 12 to 1. The Ripamondi was 4 to 1, 8 to 1, 12 to 1. The McCormick-Fisher was 4 to 1, 8 to 1, 12 to 1, 15 to 1. And then there were some novel ones that occurred at lower doses that occurred. But our range, here's our scoping range, though. When you look at less than 100 milligrams of morphine, the range was 2.5 to 6.9. When you looked at 101 to 300, it was 3.5 to 10. When you go to 301 to 600, it's 3.4 to 19. And when you go to over 600, it ranges from 10 to 22. So again, I think that questions, particularly at the upper levels, using that kind of chart for conversion, because you're going to have wide inter-individual differences that do occur. Controversies. Several guidelines have recommended automatically reducing the calculated conversion ratio dose by 25 to 50% because of non-cross tolerance. How many have seen that or do that? Okay. However, adjusting doses do not represent the published conversion ratio. The published conversion ratio was the safe ratio. It was the window ratio that you had between side effects and overdose. So what happens is when you are reducing doses by 25 to 50%, you're going below the conversion ratios and producing a greater risk of having a poor response when you rotate. So if you talk to the Italians, they never do this. There is no study, randomized study, that ever validated that particular practice. It was based upon the fact that there was non-cross tolerance between opioids. But that's a theory. There is no data to suggest that that is true. Furthermore, while it's assumed to be safer, it does increase the risk for withdrawal. And people may experience atypical withdrawal when you're on the bottom part of that, such as dysphoria, fatigue, insomnia, irritability, which are elements of withdrawals. So if you convert someone and they become irritable, dysphoric, have increasing fatigue, insomnia, you actually may be below the dose that you need to be, and they may be having atypical withdrawal. So recommendations are expert opinion only due to the lack of randomized trials supporting the practice, and certainly is not embraced internationally. And that was pretty evident when we did our Delphi. Bidirectional. How many believe that there are bidirectional differences in opioid conversions? You know, it's certainly in the literature that you have to be careful, you know, about going from one direction to another. Certain studies suggest the potential bidirectional differences. Then the study was basically Eduardo Barrera's study looking at morphine and hydromorphone and switching one for the other and going back and forth. And actually, there are several studies that looked at that. The bidirectional differences in opioid conversion ratios remain unproven. Because opioid conversion ratios are imprecise due to the high degree of inter-individual variability, study investigating bidirectional differences involved small numbers of patients and were underpowered for the outcome. Investigators who suggest that there may be bidirectional differences have also stated in their discussion that it remains unproven and requires further investigation. So when you looked at the tables I got, I just put them in inverse because we don't know that there's any bidirectional differences in opiates. Could there be? There may be. We did I'm going to divert just for a minute. We did 3 patients that we converted from buprenorphine to methadone. Now, buprenorphine is an interesting drug, but it is a chaperone drug, and it actually brings up opioid receptors. And if any of you guys know the literature, if you use an antagonist, that may reset the opioid responses that occurred. And we found that when we went from buprenorphine to methadone, the ratio was like 1-to-1, which you would never have anticipated, to about 1-to-3. So it was a ratio we didn't anticipate. So could there be? There could be, but it really hasn't been investigated. But we don't know of any bidirectional differences that have occurred. There are significant differences in conversion ratios with a direct comparison between 2 opioids, in contrast to indirect comparisons using a third intermediary opioid, usually morphine. So we talk about morphine daily equivalents, so converting through a third opioid. In a network meta-analysis of equal analgesic potency ratios in patients on controlled analgesia, patient-controlled analgesia, or PCA pumps, sufentanil potency relative to morphine was 243.9 with a 95% confidence interval of 161 to 373. But the indirect comparison through a third opioid, it was 526 to 1. And without overlapping confidence intervals. The direct comparison of the analgesic potency of morphine and nalfentanil was 2.8, confidence interval of 1.2 to 6.4, but it was 11.2 for the indirect comparison. So the indirect comparison that we try to use in patients may actually add an additional error in what we do as far as conversional ratios. For fentanyl and morphine, the direct comparison was 70, ranging from 55.9 to 88.6, but the indirect comparison was 43.3, ranging between 32.9 to 56.8. So you may miss it using an MEDD. Now, as I showed on that original table, you may have to use an MEDD. And the reason why is there hasn't been a direct comparison made, perhaps between 2 opioids, such as fentanyl and hydrocodone or whatever you're using. So it may be difficult in that kind of conversion to make it. Now, reconciling conversion ratios between opioids and routes. So there are people say, well, can I go from oral morphine to IV hydromorphone? What is the ratio that occurs in that? And there are not randomized trials, but there's some suggestion that it's 11-to-1. But when you look at this study by Trillet, the conversion tables constructed to reconcile conversion ratios between opioids and routes may be inaccurate due to variability in opioid bioavailability. So the oral morphine to transdermal fentanyl ratio reported in this paper was 70-to-1. That's really close to what we had. In the same review, though, the subcutaneous morphine to subcutaneous fentanyl ratio was 66-to-1, which would mean that the oral bioavailability of morphine was almost complete, which doesn't make sense. So sometimes in reading these things, it produces actually more confusion in those kind of calculations that occurred. The potential impact of overcoming the challenges of studying and applying the available limited evidence to opioid conversion in clinical practice is significant for multiple reasons. I believe that there is enough published evidence that conversion ratios are reasonably known for the most available medications, the most commonly used medications. Conversion ratios are ballpark ratios, the window between opioid toxicity and withdrawal. Doses need to be adjusted to analgesia with minimal side effects. The most important factors are to individualize therapy and follow the patient closely during opioid conversion. And family members are an asset and should be educated about the dose, dosing strategy, and outcome, and whom to call if there are questions or problems. The other gap that is equity, diversity and equity that occurs. I mean, in our country, for instance, obviously minorities are not treated the same as whites are. And we know that from opioid dosing. We know that, African Americans and Latinos are underdosed, often underdosed. We don't know if that occurs in conversion ratios, in converting. If someone is already on an opioid, is an African American going to be converted, if they need to be, the same as a white or will a Latino? So there are really some sensitive social issues that occur in that. Not all countries metabolize opioids the same. For instance, the Chinese have a high incidence of CYP2D6 poor metabolizers. So is their ratio in drugs that are metabolized through that particular enzyme going to be different than others? And then there's opioids that have stigmata to them. And that's stigmata, particularly methadone and buprenorphine, have the stigmata of addiction in the United States because we're going through an opioid epidemic that is ongoing. It's in its third wave. Opioids have a stigmata, but methadone and buprenorphine have a strong stigmata of association with addiction. So one of the issues that we face is if you're converting someone from morphine to buprenorphine or you're microdosing to them, they may think that you're treating them because they're an addict or that they're going to be addicted to it, or that for some reason, why are you using methadone? I thought that was for maintenance therapy. So there are these issues, these social issues, this equity, diversity, and inclusion issues that occur with converting opioids that really need to be addressed in the future. So this scoping systematic review has multiple weaknesses and strengths to it. And I hope I pointed out as much the gaps as the strengths. The weaknesses lie with the quality of studies and biases in design, including randomized trials as discussed. Conversion ratios will be imprecise due to inter-individual variability in opioid responses. Ultimately, well-powered, well-designed, adequately powered studies will inform the best practices for accurate conversion ratios. So the effort of what we're trying to do in the international consensus is to put a line in the sand that we hope that future trials will be able to alter those conversion ratios, reconfirm those conversion ratios, and address the other issues that seem to be missing. The strength of this scoping review are the large number of randomized trials and non-randomized trials, which is largely, it's the largest systematic review to date. So I wanted to save time for discussions, questions, comments, criticisms, and even if you had questions regarding converting someone, I think we need to, I'd be glad to address that. So with that, I'd like to open it up. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Davies. That was an excellent presentation. Please use the mic if you have any questions.
Can we turn on the lights? Thank you.
Thank you very much for the presentation and the update. Wonderful work, very useful. So my question was around buprenorphine. I didn't see it in the table of the consensus recommendations for the.
It didn't make it. It just missed it. So that's why you didn't see it. So the systematic review is the evidence. The consensus is the international, so they may, you may have some differences to that, but it is a point well made. Now, many of the experts didn't have either buprenorphine or felt that they had not had enough experience with it to be able to answer that issue. So yes, good observation.
Thank you very much for doing this really hard work, huge effort. I was glad that you mentioned the genetic issues, and I'm hoping that those next randomized controlled trials will actually be also collecting that kind of genetic and other variability, even just the body mass and the different things that might influence that bioavailability.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think that's, I think taking advantage of now, for instance, genetically looking at people being, women obviously going to oxycodone or codeine, sort of, looking at CYP2D6 and, the potential effects on infants, was a beginning ground of looking at, there are differences genetically, and that obviously adds variability. Can we use a panel to be able to better convert someone, have a panel? And I think that's a great future development, that may actually help as far as narrowing and increasing the safety of conversion, and also narrowing the ratios, knowing what groups. And particularly if you have an ethnically diverse group, I think that's probably even more of an issue.
Thank you. Has there been any evidence seen in the literature of differences in bioavailability between short-acting and long-acting forms that might introduce additional, make that error bar a little bit bigger?
That's a good question, and I don't think I can answer that. I think that there's a large inter-individual variability. We know that with morphine. That there are variabilities that do occur. And we also know that co-medications may increase or reduce the bioavailability of certain opioids. So when you look at these studies, no one controlled for co-medications that they were receiving. And that may actually add to the greater variability that you have. And are there different conversion ratios between an immediate release versus a sustained release? That's an interesting question, because a immediate release risks small mini withdrawals that occur that may be mistaken for, for poor responses that occur that you won't see with sustained release. Sustained release has a greater risk of producing opioid tolerance. So maybe if you're on a sustained release, you'll be converted more frequently than on immediate release, or vice versa, depending on what's transpiring. So excellent point, an excellent point. Other questions?
Can I ask a question? Just whenever we have learners, we always discuss this notion of converting from one opioid to the next, like you said, and decreasing by about 25%. Are you now saying maybe that's not necessary based on this information, given the safe zone that you were describing?
Actually, if I could say this,
Yeah.
the panel would say you shouldn't do that.
Okay.
And the reason why is the conversion ratios are what they are. So it is the population understood as the safe ratio. So when you go down, what you're doing is you may be significantly underdosing with it. So, you know, people have said, oh, if you have pain, if you're converting largely for pain and side effects, you should go equal analgesic. If you're, you know, converting for side effects, you should reduce the dose by 25 or 50%. There's no evidence to suggest that that practice, I mean, there is no evidence in that sense.
Thank you.
Other questions?
Thanks for doing this. Very interesting. I missed the first few minutes, but what we sometimes do, like that last comment that you made about the side effects, I think that if we're converting a patient because the pain is uncontrolled and we're concerned that you know, we want to optimize pain, then I don't reduce it. I just do the straight conversion. Sometimes I'll even go even a little higher, depending on what the pain is like and what the patient's alertness is. But if we're converting just for side effects, sometimes I do reduce a little bit because I'm just concerned that we're going to make it worse. And then we'll do, you know, over the next 24 hours, especially because I only really do inpatients, then we'll increase it within 24 hours. But maybe that's even a little bit too conservative.
You know, that's a good question. It's a theory that hasn't been tested clinically with it. I think the most important element was the last thing that you said. We check back in 24 hours. Yeah. You know, that is probably the most important thing to do in converting someone is you take the ratio, but you make sure that you follow them closely. In other words, you don't set and forget. In other words, this is the ratio, we're okay. We'll see you back in a week.
But your patients are mostly outpatients or inpatients, or it's a mixture of both?
These are a mixture.
Mixture.
These are a large mixture of it. We took inpatients, outpatients, and they were cancer and non-cancer with it. And they were acute pain and they were chronic pain. So that's, you know, is the ratio different if you have someone with chronic pain as opposed to acute pain? You know, if someone's already opioid tolerant, are they going to be more tolerant to the other one? You know, and that's an issue that hasn't really been well studied.
And just one last comment. I think that for the inpatients, it is a little bit easier because we can reassure ourselves that the nurses are watching them. It's an acute unit, and we see the nursing notes on Cerner on the computer. And so it's very reassuring to say, well, let's get as close as we can without going over. It's like, you know, like the game shows where you just want to get just right. But if the patient's getting you know, too drowsy or something, it's so easy to change it, especially on short acting. So I could see it's much harder for those patients that are outpatient monitored. That's what
I think you need a good nurse navigator or making calls back. And I frequently make calls back to find out what's happening. I think the key to good conversion ratios is really the follow-up, is really adjusting it to the individual. That's the safest part of it. I tend to be relatively more comfortable going to buprenorphine because of its ceiling on respiratory depression. So it's a very forgiving drug for me in the sense of ratios are concerned. Fentanyl, I have difficulty with. We're not allowed to use fentanyl in any way except in ICUs. So in our units or so. And I don't use transdermal fentanyl, just simply in the United States. It's just a great way to put fentanyl on the street because the patches or people lip the patches or so. So I don't tend to use it from that point of view. But that's because of my environment. In Montour County, where I am, it has the highest opioid death rate per county in Pennsylvania. It's a poor area. So, and we try to avoid oxycodone. And the reason why is its high addiction potential. It's a very high addicting drug. Actually, the French recognized it in 1954. John Banacca wrote about it in 1976. And the Mayo wrote about it in 1981 before the crisis occurred, that John Banacca would not use oxycodone chronically. He said, and so either way, because it has a high addiction potential, it's what set off the crisis. And it wasn't a family that did it. It was a drug that did it. Interesting enough, sustained release morphine didn't. Sustained release morphine was out a long time before sustained release oxycodone, and it never set off the crisis. But oxycodone has a very unique effect on the brain. It's taken up threefold to sixfold. It's sudden, and it produces a very sustained dopamine release. And so people don't have side effects with it. They like it. And when you try to get them off, they get a great dysphoria with it. So it's very hard to get them off. So clinicians like it because they don't call back and say, complain, but trying to get them off is much more difficult. So there are programs that will only allow 7 days, and then they have to switch to a different opioid. With it. And particularly if you're dealing with someone with addiction or has a history of addiction or is at risk, we try to avoid it actually. But it's the most common opioid that we get in the cancer center. If someone comes to us that has previously been prescribed before we have seen them, oxycodone is usually, and it's like we forgot our history, of what happened in the States in the 80s and 90s. But that's my own view.
Oh, okay.
Somebody, let's say, that had metastatic pancreatic European at our stage, quite a bit of that affected, and we're not as focused on it. And so that problem maybe less than 6 months.
Yeah. Yeah. There are probably reasons for using it in visceral pain because the kappa receptor is so well expressed in the GI tract. So I'm saying preferred in that sense. It's not an all or nothing type of thing. But I think of another opioid before I think of oxycodone. But for instance, visceral pain, it's a good drug to use. So.
Thank you, Dr. Davis. We're getting a signal that we're out of time. Thank you. That was an excellent session. The code is 1862-1862. Thank you.
You.
Thank you so much.